bold. We need bold action. We need to move forward. And good on Schumer and the Democrats for doing it. Now, look, would I have wanted to see something bipartisan? And maybe is there still a chance? Yeah, maybe there still is a chance for the Republicans to come around now that they go, oh wow, they're all on the same page. We're going to have this rammed down our throats. Maybe we should get something for our districts. And here's the really messed up part. And this is where Democrats don't seem to get how the game is played, which is why I usually want them in charge, because they don't see it as a game. They see it as governing. But the game is you have to punish those who voted against it. They don't do that. I mean, the weird thing is the states who are represented by Republicans do very well in these bills, because Democrats are about good governance. They're about making sure that we raise everybody up, even the people who are trying to overthrow the country, which is just weird. But we need really, really visionary, bold action in this moment. And I don't see the Republican leaders doing that. It just is what it is. Another thing that really got my goat today is the story coming out of California. Evidently, Kroger's the big food chain, and this is why we need federal action. This is why you need to have federal action. You know how during the rise of the pandemic back in March, April, May, we were calling grocery store workers, and we were calling transit workers and nurses, and we were calling all those people heroes, and then we slapped a nice label on them. They were essential. We didn't give them any real money. They got a nice press release and a pat on the back. Attaboy, attagirl, you keep it up. You keep putting yourself at risk and your family at risk, but make sure that the profits keep rolling in. As soon as people started calling for, hey, how about some substantial raises? How about some hazard pay? That hero stuff kind of tapped down a little bit. So you had a number of municipalities across the country who said, hey, you know what? We want this to be law. One of those cities in California, the city of Long Beach, they came out and said, look, we want to make sure that people that are working in these facilities get something extra. So they went and they passed an ordinance that said if you are a chain that has, I think it's like 500 employees globally and I think it was 15 locally, something along those lines, that you would have to pay for the short term. I think it was 120 days, an extra $4 an hour to your workers to help them get through this. So now you have Kroger, who is one of the larger grocery store chains in the country, say, well, you know what? We're going to close a couple of our stores in Long Beach just to spite you. And it's again, another one of these moments where corporate America does a nice job of taking advantage of PR, because they were one of the ones saying, oh, our essential heroes, how wonderful they are as our profits keep rolling in. And when it comes time to put a little meat on the table, little meat on the bone, they chop it off. So there are people who are condemning this, rightly so, because there are people who are doing the right thing. And now, look, I think this should have been a federal action. I don't think it should be up to putting local communities against each other. But in Seattle, where they did just about the exact same thing, in Seattle, you have Trader Joe's who said, okay, yeah. And not only are we going to do it in Seattle where we have to by resolution, by law, we're going to do it across the country for the short term. This is the kind of stuff that I think we need to have. You need to have good actors, and you need to reward them for that. So good on Trader Joe's. I have my problems with all of these places, but good on them for right now. We'll see how it plays out. The other part of this, and it comes back to the idea of having collective bargaining rights. For me, this comes back to all of these workers should be unionized. They should have been fighting. I know unions have been fighting for hazard pay for a long time, and in a lot of cases getting it. UFCW has, who represents grocery workers, they have done a really good job of getting hazard pay for their members. This for me is not one of those moments where we go, we'll let the town council do this stuff. No, this should be, we bargain for this stuff in the workplace, and then as a community, we shame the hell out of the ones who don't. So for Ralph's and for Food for Less, which are owned by Kroger's, I'm saying, at some point you boycott them. At some point you let them know that of your displeasure of what they've done. Again, that's one of those really angering things that we see corporate America getting away with. Which is why, again, I keep coming back to we need to have stronger labor unions and stronger laws to allow workers to bargain for better wages, hours, conditions, especially right now with the pandemic conditions. For me, that's simple. A couple of big news today. Jeff Bezos is stepping down. He's no longer going to be the CEO. He's going to take a different role, I guess, sometime in the third quarter, so he can spend more time on philanthropy and more time on his little space project and more time at the Washington Post. The philanthropy part is really interesting to me because both he and his ex-wife, Mackenzie Scott, are giving tons of money away through charity. And I'm like, well, that's very nice of you. It's very nice of you to take the money that should have been paid to all of your workers that you've basically taken from them and made them work in almost sweatshop conditions at poverty wages, and then you've taken it and you've been philanthropic with it. Good for you. How about we do this instead? How about instead of we using you as the middle person to get those people what they need? How about you just pay them a reasonable wage? How about we do that? How about the folks who in Alabama who are right now fighting for survival to join a union and are being harassed at every turn? They can't even go to the bathroom without being attacked with anti-union messages. How about we let them organize? We sit down with them collectively as a group and we share some of that profit, that obscene profit that you're now spending on whatever your whim of the day is. How about we let those workers be able to have a better life so that they don't need charity? It's one of those things that's always frustrated me because I am not a charity person. I am not someone who believes we should even have charity. I'm someone who believes your work should be able to fund whatever you need. What you do for a living, what you wake up every day to do should be enough to fund your existence and that of your family. And if the private sector can't or won't do that, we need the public sector to step in. And we need floors on wages. A $15 an hour minimum wage is not outrageous. I was thinking about this the other day. Back in 2012, when they first proposed this, and we had some of the first people who were screaming this on the show back then. I was going, $15 an hour. That's. I like it. I'm there. I don't know that you're going to get it, but it's a good goalpost because then maybe you back in 12, I was saying maybe you get it back to 10 with a pathway to down the road. Now $15 an hour is not a goalpost anymore. It's what it should have already been had we been moving in this direction. Because 2012, and again, I'm not this great mathematician, but that's almost 9 years ago when that began. It began at the end of 2012. So you're talking almost 9 years ago that people were saying, $15 an hour is our goalpost. Had you passed something and it just kept up with inflation, we would have been much closer. But for me, the idea is you shouldn't have to go and beg for pennies. You shouldn't have to go ask for a heating assistance or rental assistance or have your kids stand in the school lunch line or have to use cards to go to the store and buy food with. There's nothing more humiliating than that. Your labor, what you do every day, the work, the blood, the sweat, the passion you put into what you do, that should be enough. And, the bottom should be a reasonable existence. And then through your harder work, you get better. But what we're at right now is deplorable. And the fact that you've got Amazon going, well, we pay $15 an hour. That's the floor, man. You're a multi-billion-dollar company that could easily pay your workforce better. But instead, we're just taking money from those people and handing it to the Bezos couple, and they then are sharing it around with whom they think is worthy. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. And also the big news today, the impeachment, the 9 impeachment managers filed a brief with the Senate. They are arguing that the impeachment for incitement of insurrection against the former president, because he is singularly responsible for the uprising, They described his actions as betrayal of historic proportions. I think that's an understatement. You got the House who voted for the impeachment. 10 Republicans came over. Everyone's saying, that's the most ever, and it is. It's the most ever for that to happen. The Democrats, wrote in their brief that Trump summoned a mob to Washington, ordered them into a frenzy, and aimed them like a loaded cannon down Pennsylvania Avenue. They go on to argue that he must be barred from ever holding office again. Now, the Trump legal defense team, they have come out and they have said it's unconstitutional. The Senate has no authority to try Donald Trump. Their argument is he's no longer in office, so there's nothing the Senate can do to him. He's now a private citizen. And my mind goes, if that's the case, there's a court of law. We can go there. Would you rather you want to roll the dice on you don't get to hold office again and you get a black mark on your folder throughout history? Or do you want to spend the rest of your days with a tin cup singing, "Oh, woe is me," by banging on the bars? I personally would like to see the bars. Now, the impeachment trial is going to begin on February 9th. Can't wait for that to happen. What was interesting to me is there was nothing in their argument about the steal. There was nothing about the allegations that Trump made of all of this voter fraud, which I find really interesting. Tells me that the legal team is going, shh, shut up. Now, I think the impeachment has to happen. There's no question about it. We have to hear the stories of the people who were involved in this. We have to hear from the traitors. We're in a moment where we have to air our dirty laundry. And I'm generally not someone who thinks in that way. I'm generally not someone who focuses on the past or talks about my feelings. Rarely do you ever hear that. And I'll be honest, I think too many on the left spend way too much time sharing way too much that I don't really care about. But this is something that needs to be dealt with. This is something that needs to be out in public and exposed. And we need to do it in a way that makes those people who were behind this feel shame. And I know, but that's bullying, Rick. Yes. At some point, you've got to bully these people back into sanity. Because for too long, they've been bullying this nation with their insanity. And the thing is I sat and I listened to AOC's almost 90-minute discussion. And I got to be honest, I went into it going, oh, do I have to sit here and listen to people talk about their feelings and how they're victims? And she went into, her trauma, of which I'm like, I think she did it in the best way possible. She's like, hey, look, everybody has this stuff. It compiles, it gets worse. But here's what's happened to me. She talked about sexual harassment or abuse in her past. But she talked about in real, terms, what it was like to be in that Capitol, knowing that this could be the end. If they found her, they would rip her limb from limb. And there's that feeling that I don't think most people can grasp. This idea that had that mob found her, and I guess they were just they were there. They just had to get through a door. And if they knew she was behind that door, there would have been no stopping them. So this whole thing with Ted Cruz and this whole thing with these accusations, to me, we've got to air this dirty laundry. We've got to expose every person who is behind this. We've got to expose all the moneyed interests who are pushing it and all the people who are blowing the dog whistles and blowing the bullhorns and all the people who are behind this. This was a coup attempt. We need to get to the bottom of it. This can never happen again. And the sooner we get through it, the better I think we're going to be. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. War ended. In exchange for $15 million, the United States gained 525,000 square miles of land. This territory included all or parts of Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. Mexico gave up all claims to Texas, and the Rio Grande was established as the border. The initial treaty promised protection of land, civil rights, and full citizenship for those Mexicans who stayed on the newly acquired territory. These guarantees were deleted from the final ratification. Expansionist aims reignited debates about the extension of slavery. The newly formed Free Soil Party gained traction with its campaign to limit, localize, and discourage slavery. Their banner read, "Free soil, free speech, free labor, and free men." Antagonisms were briefly tempered with the Compromise of 1850. This allowed California to be admitted as a free state. It also prevented the outlawing of slavery in the new territories. The slave trade was banned in the District of Columbia, but a new and more stringent fugitive slave law was enacted. Debates regarding expansion of slavery would rage on throughout the 1850s, culminating in the Civil War.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we're in this moment where I think all of us want our kids to go back to school. We want to kind of get back to somewhat near normal. We want life to return to what it was at one point. But there are those of us who are going, well, you know what? Maybe we take a second. We do it right so that this doesn't get worse. Because part of the problem that we're facing is there are a number of variants that are popping up that we don't know how to deal with because it has gotten so big and so out of control that the virus is actually mutated in ways that we're not really quite sure of. So in this moment, we've gone through all this. We've followed this entire journey, and we've gotten to this point. Why now go and make it even worse? And I look at Chicago, where the teachers are going, hold on, wait a second. We don't have the resources that we need to put kids in a classroom all the time. We certainly don't have the resources to have people come in and clean and do the deep cleaning that needs to be done. We don't have the space to do the social distancing. We should not be opening up our schools just yet. And you've got a Democratic mayor who's saying, no, we've got a study. We have a study. And that study says it's going to be fine. And the teachers are going, no. I'm here to share some thoughts on, where we are in this divide, because on Sunday, the Chicago mayor said, you're coming back. And on Sunday, the teacher said, no, I don't think so. I'm here to share some thoughts on that. I've asked our good friend Kenzo Shibata to come talk with us. Kenzo's a high school teacher there in Chicago, also the CTU's functional vice president for high school. Kenzo, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks so much for having me on. I'm glad to share this information with your audience.
So walk me through this. We all saw the story on Sunday. You had the mayor come out, little Rahm Emanuel, who's saying, go back to school, Kenzo. And you're going, hold on a second. We don't think it's safe. Walk me through that process of what happened on Sunday.
Well, on Sunday, we have a new mayor, Lori Lightfoot, and we have been in negotiations as a union about what safe reopening would look like for months now. And on Monday, the Board of Education and the mayor was expecting teachers to come in, teachers and other school workers, pre-K through 8th grade schools to teach in person. And I can get to in a minute to why that's kind of a non-starter. But on Sunday, they were supposed to, the Board of Education and the mayor, our schools are run by the mayor essentially. So she has to be at the table to get things done. Instead of being at the table with our union leadership, they were doing those Sunday talk shows, she and the CPS CEO of schools, Janice Jackson. So it was really disheartening because that could have been a day where a deal could have been made and we would have gone into Monday knowing what things were going to look like. And since then, the mayor, and this is, I think, the third time she's pushed the deadline. She said yesterday that she is going to do a 48-hour cool down. But, I think the important thing in the context here is that a couple weeks ago, the union, the Chicago Teachers Union, we took a vote, and that vote said that we were going to continue to work remotely, regardless of whether or not we're called back into the schools. And if the school district continues to lock us out, we will, as an entire union, even those not affected, go out on strike. So it's minute by minute, we're waiting for some good news. But we know at least there's a stay of 48 hours before there will be movement. But in the meantime, we're still teaching remotely.
Yeah, I read this story that she said if you don't come back, we're going to cut off your access to the remote stuff, so that
Mhm.
you're if you won't come back to the classroom and be in harm's way, we're not going to let you do the other stuff. And I'm going, but hold on, where do the kids play in this? Because look, I don't want my kids to go back in an unsafe
Yep.
condition. I don't want them bringing something home to their grandparents or their mothers or their fathers. We're in this moment. This is the height of it. We're finally breaking over the peak where we're not getting 100,000+ new cases a day and 4,000 people dying. We're finally seeing maybe a break of light. And now you're saying, because you've got this study that came out during the Trump years, that things are fine, that you're going to rush back into it? Makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it totally doesn't. And it doesn't make sense to I'm a parent as well. That's one of the things that kills me when the school district says, well, parents think this and teachers think that. Well, most teachers I know are parents or have some sort of family that they're accountable to. So we're both. And my son is working from home. We don't love it. We would much prefer for him to be working with his classmates and socializing and doing all that stuff, but it's just not safe. And as it is now, his teacher, my wife did a lot of work organizing parents. She's a room parent, and she was there to talk to everyone about how unsafe the conditions are. Because in the school district, the principals, what are their job? They're tasked by the Chicago Public Schools with selling in-person teaching. So of course you're going to trust the principal. You send your kid to the same school that the principal works at, so you're going to trust them. But that's why parent involvement was so important. And my wife called, and all but like one student now is doing distant learning. And his poor teacher, she's such a hard worker. She's going to have to teach one student in front of her behind plexiglass with a mask on, and then also at a webcam of 15 other kids. I don't know how she's going to do it, but that's the board doesn't have a real plan.
Yeah, and this again, it comes back to the failure of leadership, where they now have this, you're going to do what we say you're going to do,
Mm-hmm.
and not willing to take all these other things into consideration. Where over the summer, I got to be honest with you, Kenzo, this should have been something you guys were worked out over the summertime. Like a lot of this stuff, when there was
Mm-hmm.
the lull between, and we knew there was going to be a lull between the height of March, April, and May. When we got to June, July, August, we should have been going, hey, the real problem's coming. Let's get all this stuff worked out now. And nobody did that. And that's what's just incredibly frustrating.
I'm so glad you said that, because the school district, we went to we went into virtual teaching last spring. Our mayor was going to have us do in person throughout the pandemic. It wasn't until the governor stepped in and put a stop to that, and shut down the entire state for a period of time. And then throughout the pandemic last school year, there was periodic reminders from the district, like, this was a temporary thing. We're going to do in person. We're going to do in person. So of course, us at the union and our union officers leading the charge here, we're trying to get meetings with the board saying, okay, for the 2020-21 school year, what's this going to look like? And they just said, well, because in this situation, the mayor has total authority over the schools. We hold the power as communities and teachers and students and parents, but they have all the authority. So they've just locked us out of those discussions. And then when things got closer and closer to the school year, they unveiled this plan. The plan was untenable. It was even worse than the plan they unveiled this year. And so the union's House of Delegates, those are the representatives in all of our school buildings, we came together over Zoom and took a vote. I'm sorry, we planned the meeting to take a vote on a strike. Just the fact that we announced this meeting forced the hand of the Chicago Public Schools. And then this school year started remotely. And then, it's just like a repeat of last year, where periodically they're reminding us we can move you back into the classrooms. And now they're trying to do that. And they're playing divide and conquer by sending elementary and not high school at the moment.
Now, there's a study out there, and maybe you can talk a little bit to this. And I'd love to know who's behind this, who's funding the study. Because anytime I see a study, the first thing I want to know is who paid for it. Because generally, you can figure out. You don't even have to read it. Generally, you find out who paid for it. You know what the conclusion is going to be. So I'd like to start with this study that they're going after, saying, well, we can send those kids back into the classroom, and they usually don't get sick, and they usually don't take it with them, and this isn't a risk. So can you tell me about the study that they're using as the basis for saying, no, Kenzo, you guys can go back you guys can go back.
Well, I mean, we're looking at it, and it's a total non-starter because children are special, and you could say X amount of bodies in a room could cause infection, but if you look at things like, some students have in their individualized education plans that they are not required to wear a mask. For some reason, they have a medical condition where they can't, and it's just kind of glossed over that teachers and school workers are going to have to work with these kids. And the kids do have an absolute right to equal education, but it's not safe to do that in person. And other things that they don't really keep in mind is that, there are students that go through many, many masks in a day because they have problems like, keeping saliva in their mouths. And there are workers that have to work on that. And schools are special places where little kids give hugs when it's inappropriate, and they don't know any better. They think you can make a mistake and then, oops, I'm sorry. But once they've given a hug to another kid or to a teacher, you can't turn back from there. So, as parents, the parent group Raise Your Hand, they're organizing parents around this, and they saw that immediately, and we're like, no, this is a non-starter.
Yeah, but back to these people who are saying that none of that stuff's a problem, because the private schools. I guess the private schools in your area have been doing in-person schooling since the fall. In fact, a Chicago listener sent me, this whole long dissertation on how, the private schools and some of these charters, they've been doing it well. And then, sent me this little comparison about, the just complete difference in resources that the charter schools and the private schools have compared to what the public schools have. And for me, there are two arguments. One, the first one being we should never send our kids into schools that are as badly funded as the public schools are. And two, how did it get that way? That we've allowed our public schools to be just starved to the point to where, as the one guy, as he said, he goes, the kids come in, they have to bring their own masks, they have to rewear them. As where you go to some of these private schools and these charter schools, they've got disposable masks that they go through multiple ones per day, to your point. And, for me, if we don't have the bare minimums, how are you going to move forward if you don't have class sizes that are comparable? And he said, the private schools have been able to spread out. They got like 9 kids in a class, where the public schools have like 25 or 30. There's a lot of differences. So you can't just say, hey, they're doing it, we should too. That's not very bright.
And, a big thing in the Chicago public schools is, we fought in the last contract to get one nurse in every school, and we won it, but we won it on this graduated program for hiring the nurses. The board said, it would be impossible to hire that many nurses the first year of the contract. And so we agreed to this timetable. And what's kind of heartbreaking about it is the timetable that we agreed to should be the floor. Like the things that we outlined in the contract negotiations were things that could have mitigated the damage of this, the pandemic in the schools. And the district, instead of saying, okay, a nurse in every school, well, we're going to try to do this as quickly as possible, they said, well, they basically are doing the absolute bare minimum to fold them in. And, I'm not saying that teachers were psychic and predicted the pandemic, but everything we asked for in the last contract, a nurse in every school, a social worker in every school, psychologist in every school, additional, clean bathrooms. Like there were so many things that we demanded that would have made us at least better prepared for this.
But here's the thing, Kenzo, and if I could stop you there, the thing that you're asking for is not outrageous. That's commonplace in
Yes.
most schools across this country. Because I remember talking about the Philadelphia school district, who they didn't have nurses in every school, and in fact there were a couple of children who died. Now whether those nurses could have intervened and helped those children, I can't say, but
Yep.
they didn't have a shot because there was nobody there. You had schools that don't have librarians, they don't have guidance counselors, they don't have the bare minimums of what people, at least of my age group, think of as normal. So you've got all of these challenges that you don't have already, and now you're going to put global pandemic on top of that.
Mm-hmm. I was just talking to Mary DeFino. She's a social worker and an activist in Chicago. And what I didn't even realize is with the social worker component, what we demanded, if we were to staff one social worker at every school, the caseload would still be one social worker for every 500 students, which she said is 10 times what her professional guild recommends.
Wow.
So even, we're far behind the bare minimum that experts think we have in these schools. And once we do go back into in-person, our students and our teachers are going to be deeply, deeply traumatized. And so the board needs to act up and, hire these social workers, and how, if they can go beyond our contract and hire more for the sake of the kids, maybe we wouldn't distrust them as much as we do.
This just seems bizarre to me, that in this moment they're going to come out and try and impose this and do this kind of strong arm tactic. But let me ask you the other side of this, because I do have some people who have said, well, you know what, kids are being traumatized by this because they're not doing well in the online world, and that we should give them the option. My mindset is simple. If we don't have the resources to do one or the other, there's no way in hell we can do both. But I'm curious your thought.
I mean, that's the big bottom line, is that we can't afford to do both. And we're going to see if it comes to it and teachers are trying to teach simultaneously and in person. We'll see, how that works, and if it works. I agree that what is best for young people is in-person schooling. I think education is really an important part of schooling, but it's the socialization that's also really important. But in my school and, the district where I teach, students are being heavily affected by COVID. Like, the first person I lost to COVID was a former student of mine who's, he was 31, and, he's someone that I was a bit of a mentor to. So it was very real to me, and it's very real to a lot of teachers, and it's definitely very real to poor and working class Black and brown communities. And I think that is why the number of parents that are actually signing up for in-person is very paltry. In fact, only 20% of eligible parents signed up at all. And that number keeps dropping because they'll send their kids to school, they'll see the conditions, and then they pull their kids out and do virtual again. And so the parents have kind of spoken with their feet in this case.
Yeah, you would think that they would listen. So last question I've got for you, is there a way we can help? What can people do to help, even in their school districts?
Well, this is what we know is at stake here in Chicago, is when we had, West Virginia and Arizona, these red state, right to work states going out on strike, their teachers going on strike. They all cited Chicago as inspiration for that. And that's why we feel like, we have to win this, because once we win this, then we're going to take this blueprint to all those other places and show them how to fight it. Because even though it's illegal to strike in those states, one thing that I want to note is that our last two mayors accused all of our strikes of being unfair or illegal, and tried to get injunctions on all of them. So we're living in this era of bad faith and from our leaders, and they just don't get labor, and we have to teach them. And I think we teach them through job actions. Hopefully this won't come to a strike, but we definitely are prepared if it comes down to it.
Good stuff. Kenzo, I wish you guys the best. I hope you'll come back and share some more with us.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thanks so much. Kenzo Shibata, a high school teacher and a VP of functional high schools there at the Chicago Teachers Union. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1821. That was the birthday of the first woman to earn her medical degree in the United States. Her name was Elizabeth Blackwell. She was born in Bristol, England. Her family moved to the United States when she was just 11 years old. Elizabeth decided she wanted to pursue a career in medicine. She believed that women patients should have the option of a female doctor. But it was not easy to make her dream come true. Medicine was considered men's work. Undeterred, Elizabeth began to study medicine on her own. Medical schools rejected her applications. Finally, she was accepted to the Geneva Medical College in New York. Most students at the school were horrified by the idea of a woman studying medicine, but she won many over with her ability and hard work. In 1849, she completed her work and graduated, but her difficulties were not over. No hospital in New York would hire her. She was even refused rental space when landlords found out she wanted it for a woman-run medical practice. Finally, she purchased a home for her practice. She also started a medical dispensary for the poor in New York City. She was later joined in her work by her sister, who also graduated with a medical degree. She went on to lecture on medicine in England, becoming the first woman to have her name on the British Medical Register. She and her sister helped to train nurses for service during the Civil War. They also founded a women's medical college that operated for 31 years. By her determination, Elizabeth Blackwell helped open the door for future generations of women to work in the field of medicine. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it looks so far, Joe Biden's administration, the cabinet members are getting through. Happy to see that. Today, Pete Buttigieg was confirmed as Secretary of Transportation. I'm happy about that, to be honest with you, because the first name that was floated was former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Would not have been happy with that. But Mayor Pete, we'll see how Secretary Pete does in dealing with our transportation needs. And here to share some thoughts on, well, the confirmation and maybe what we can expect out of Secretary Buttigieg. I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come back and share some thoughts. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. AmericanManufacturing.org is their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, great to be with you tonight.
So what do you think of the confirmation? I don't think there was ever going to be a doubt he was going to get through, but it went through fairly smoothly, I think.
Yeah. So look, I'm a Hoosier, so right there, it's a plus to have a fellow Hoosier in an office like that. We'll leave Mike Pence out of that equation, but it's good to see a competent, qualified Hoosier in there. Look, Pete Buttigieg knows how to get things done. He's incredibly bright. He's committed to carrying out Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan. He's seen this on the ground as a mayor, how important infrastructure is, from water to roads to bridge. I mean, he'll be doing the road and bridge and bus and train stuff, basically. But look, I think he gets it. And I know, because I watched his confirmation hearings, that he heard a lot from senators on the need to both invest robustly in our infrastructure and also to make sure that we're making it in America. Senator Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin specifically asked him, and since he doesn't have a track record on this, really, he pledged to do it. He said, look, I'm going to follow the Buy American, Buy America executive orders, the law, and we'll work with you to see where we can strengthen those. So I liked what I heard. Obviously, the proof is going to be in the policy, but I do think, Rick, that we're off to a really good start here.
Yeah, but we're in the middle of this pandemic. A lot of our transportation systems are struggling. In fact, just the other day we talked with someone about public transit and how our public transit systems are being starved of funding. There's massive talks of massive cuts. We haven't rebuilt our infrastructure in public transit in decades. You look at the Northeast Corridor with Amtrak and how it needs massive investments. How much is he going to be able to do as secretary, especially if Congress continues to not act and we don't get a massive infrastructure bill that we so desperately have needed for at least a decade?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so obviously the table has been set for this for some while. And Rick, as you know, I mean, the interest group politics on this are very interesting because you have business and labor who both say they want a big infrastructure investment. And I do think in this case that the Chamber of Commerce, those others are less concerned about, how do you pay for it, right? What do you got to cut or what taxes do you got to raise? And I think they've kind of resigned themselves to the fact that we're going to borrow the money, which is the right thing to do in these economic circumstances. It makes perfect sense to do that. So you have the interest group politics that are pretty well aligned. Obviously, you have a House of Representatives that I think is willing to go big on this in terms of like a 10-figure infrastructure investment. That's trillions of dollars. They passed a good bill last year that they can build on. And I think in the Senate, which is interesting because obviously you have this, is it 60 votes? Is it 50 votes? What do you need? This is a case where Joe Manchin has said, I'm willing to spend trillions of dollars on infrastructure. So right there, you have a strong commitment. And the great thing about this, Rick, is that, look, bridges, roads, they're not purple, they're not red, they're not blue. They are everywhere. They're in every district. They're in desperate need of repair. And I think members of Congress like to be in a position where they're actually delivering something tangible for their constituents. And this is something that does that. Just like, from the materials, the demand that you're getting with the factories, the jobs that you're going to get from the building trades in constructing all of this, and then the lasting benefits that you have for the community. It's desperately needed. And to your point, if we want to achieve the Joe Biden's vision of a cleaner economy, transit has to be play a central role in that. And so I agree with you that we've underinvested in transit, and there's a lot of opportunities there to do the right thing.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I used to think like you just laid out. I used to go, everybody wants to bring home the bacon. Everybody wants that bridge to nowhere that eventually leads somewhere. Everyone wants that. But, it just seems like nobody does, because we were talking about this very thing back in 2008 and 2009 as a way to stimulate the economy then. And yet we still didn't get the kind of investment that I think both you and I would say we desperately need, and what the smart people are saying. The folks over at the American Society of Civil Engineers, who gave us a D+ for our total infrastructure, saying we need those multiple trillions of dollars just to get us up to a C, not the Singapore level, somewhere mid-range, which right. I think speaks volumes.
It sure does. And I will say, I think this is a case where the economics profession has come around in terms of investment. Like, are there concerns that this would overheat the economy? And I think the answer now is no. And I think probably 10 years ago, it might have been, that might have been more the prevailing wisdom. I think that has changed, and I think that's a good thing. I think there was a great degree of caution the Obama administration about how aggressively to push forward with a recovery package or infrastructure. And I think some of that hesitation is gone. And so I do think some of those barriers have come down. And so to me, this is about being willing to spend some political capital, because it will take some juice on the part of the president to get this through. That was something Donald Trump was never willing to do, even though he was happy to kind of tee up infrastructure weeks before he tweeted all over them and wrecked them rhetorically. But we'll also see from the Democratic perspective, look, I think Chuck Schumer gets how important this could be for his caucus. I think Nancy Pelosi certainly gets how important it could be for her caucus. I think there are a lot of Republicans, again, who have unmet needs in their districts. And so I don't know that the stars are exactly aligned yet, but I think we're about in as good a position as we can be given the political circumstances that we're looking at right now.
Yeah, I guess I can't imagine why it would cost anybody political capital. This is something that, as you said, there are no red bridges or blue bridges or purple bridges. There are just bridges we need to get over and hope that they don't collapse. Especially where I'm at in Pennsylvania, we've got thousands of structurally deficient bridges.
Yeah.
And I've said for years, what we need is somebody should come up with an app for every time I'm about to go over a structurally deficient bridge that sends you a text to say, "Hey, call mom. You might not make it to the other side." This shouldn't be. And for me, the fact that we're even talking about political capital, because I think the Democrats would have come along with Trump. Had Trump come out right at the beginning and say, you know what, we're going to spend big on infrastructure, I think that would have been a kumbaya moment where you could have united the nation.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there were only a couple of occasions where that was possible, given the vast differences. And obviously on the trade reform and the USMCA, which, I mean, you can debate about whether it was perfect or not. It was certainly better than NAFTA. But that's a case where Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump were able to align. I think infrastructure was the same case. But I think Trump never really issued a plan. He talked a lot to his finance friends about doing all sorts of private investment in infrastructure, which can be very disastrous, more often than not, and never got serious about it. And again, the infrastructure week became a political joke because they would tee it up and then he would tweet something outrageous and all that goodwill would be blown. Joe Biden, I think, gets this. I think he's a lot more disciplined. He's certainly not going to ruin it by tweeting his way through it. And I think that this White House understands that this is one of those issues that is transpartisan, that it's not just going to excite Democratic voters. It's going to excite everybody. So here's hoping to see them make it a priority in the coming weeks.
Yeah, how many infrastructure weeks did we have during the 4 years that Trump was the president? Because I remember it was almost every week.
I lost count. And again, it seemed like the last 4 years was infrastructure week, right? Because it was nothing. Yeah, just strange things happened. So I suppose I imagine you can use something like that to try to focus attention if you do it the right way. But if you have a president who is disciplined, who stays on message, who has great ideas, who's willing to go big on this, and you have a Congress that's willing to back him, right there you have the pieces. Because you have all sorts of, there are mayors and governors in Pennsylvania and all over the country that are eager to see this happen as well. And so obviously there'll be some differences as you're working it out, but everybody wants to get across the finish line.
Yeah, I want to see transformational investments that's going to move us well into the future, visionary leadership that is going to bring us into the 21st century. I would love to see better rural broadband as a major part of this. There's so much infrastructure that needs to be done. And I want it built here because we need the jobs and, for our own security's sake, we need to have a manufacturing base, which is why I'm glad that Biden has talked about Buy American. In fact, there's talk now that I guess he's going to sign an executive order to reshore our supply chains, which I think is desperately needed and something Trump should have done immediately that I can't believe he didn't, since he as well signed a lot of executive orders.
Yeah, he did. They were mostly rhetorical in Trump's case, except for when they did a lot of damage on issues like immigration. But I think Biden's off to a good start here. He did the Defense Production Act for COVID goods, did the Buy American executive order that I know that we had a conversation about to make sure that government purchasing is going to Made in America products. And Bloomberg is reporting, the White House hadn't confirmed this, but Bloomberg is reporting that he will sign an executive order on supply chains and identifying critical supply chains. You think of like the glass vials that we need for the vaccines and how we aren't able to make enough of those. That to the rare earth minerals that go into all the electronic equipment that you're using and I'm using that we depend heavily on China for, and to see how we can reshore that to the United States. Again, this is something Trump promised to do. He promised to do a comprehensive report and policy on, never got around to it. And so I think that this is important, and this shows that Joe Biden is serious about this, and that this just isn't a political talking point, seeing the revitalization of American manufacturing, but it is central to his economic goals and to building more equity more racial equity, to building a brighter, clean energy future, and to having a stable, sustainable economic recovery. I think that all of these executive orders and the infrastructure spending that we discussed all align with that very well.
Yeah, and while the vision that we're talking about may make all of my Greeniac friends all excited, the reality is by bringing those jobs back and creating a manufacturing base here is also going to benefit the Trump supporters who, had Trump been doing this all along, probably wouldn't be struggling the way they are, and maybe we wouldn't be as divided as we are, because I believe you bring jobs back, you give people good, stable union jobs with decent wages, hours, conditions. We're not going to be ripped apart like we are. We're too busy leading the better life.
Yeah. Nobody, and with respect, but nobody but the environmentalists with blinders on want to trade foreign oil for made in China solar panels. What people want is a clean energy future and a future that's made in America. And you do that by investing here in infrastructure, in clean energy technology, so that we're making those solar panels, those wind turbines, and everything else that goes into powering ourselves in the coming decades in a sustainable way. You can do it right here with the right policies. And it looks to me, at least so far, that that's a future that Joe Biden sees as well.
Yeah, and again, this is one of those things where we hear a lot about unity, we hear a lot about bipartisanship. This isn't radical hippie liberal stuff. This is stuff that we used to be united on. This is stuff that we all used to agree on. There were no divides here, and I'm hoping we get back to those moments.
Yes, when he talks of unity, this is a unifying issue. And by this, I mean infrastructure. It is a unifying issue. And Made in America is a unifying issue. It's one of what pollsters call one of those moms and apple pie issues, that there is virtually no disagreement about it in American politics. It's a universal truth. And so, again, it just takes the will, it takes the prioritization, it takes a smart plan. I think that Joe Biden is capable of doing all of that. I think our Congress is now capable of doing this. So I look forward to working with them to getting this done and to creating some jobs and a brighter future right here.
No, absolutely. But here again, I keep coming back to the politics of this. And sadly, sanity, investing in our future, giving our kids a better place, still comes back to that politics. And I'm afraid we're in a moment where we still need to get to that 60 vote threshold. We still need to get to that cloture vote that allows people to vote on this. And I sadly, I'm not seeing it yet. Do you foresee a moment where this doesn't become a problem?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I wish I could forecast this with some accuracy. I do think that there are obvious, compelling reasons for Republicans to get on board a large infrastructure package like this, because there are benefits for this. It isn't a partisan issue. By the same token, and so it's really a question for them: do they want to be a part of this, and do they want to be on the side that is investing in our future, or do they want to see it happen and not be a part of it? because I do think it will happen either way. In some form, and that form may be altered, but I think for many Republicans, it's going to be a question of, do I want to be a part of this, or do I want to be on the other side of this and oppose? And when it comes to infrastructure, I'd want to be for it.
No, I'm right there with you. But I want to go back to the days, and I get a lot of flack from both sides. I would love to see the days where we were talking about pork barrel spending again. Because again, those are these bridges to nowhere, and I bring that up because it eventually went somewhere. This is how we expanded the country. This is how we made things better, by investing in things, by bringing home the bacon, so to speak.
Yeah, I worked on Capitol Hill for a dozen years, and I think all of those were in years where there were earmarks available. And people like to point out, as you mentioned, Rick, the bridges to nowhere, and some of those exist. But by and large, these are desperately needed projects that will help with economic development, and local politicians know local needs. And so I think that you can certainly put in controls to weed out some of the stuff that doesn't pass muster. But I think by and large, a lot of this, and I look at some of the projects I worked on back in Michigan and in Indiana, and they're providing enormous benefits for the citizens of those places, better infrastructure, easier commutes, more efficiency. So I'm all for it. I think it's a good idea.
Me too. I'm right there with you. But Scott, I appreciate the time. As always, great stuff. Look forward to talking to you again.
You bet, Rick. All the best to you.
Our good friend Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Do we need big, chunky, bold, visionary leadership on infrastructure? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Hello, I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. A union of over 1.4 million strong and growing, AFSCME is gaining improvements in the workplace all across America. And right here in the Commonwealth, more than 95,000 AFSCME members make Pennsylvania happen. Highways, libraries, hospitals, parks, offices, prisons, classrooms, museums, courtrooms. You'll find AFSCME members at work in all these places and many more.
I make Pennsylvania happen every day.
I make Pennsylvania happen every day.
Today's AFSCME members take on public service jobs as diverse as they are, not for the recognition, but for a better Pennsylvania. For more information, please visit our website at AFSCME13.org. Labor is changing, so is your labor union. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
The Democratic Party establishment is now issuing a go slow warning to the new president they backed. They instruct that while Biden should undo the worst edicts of Trump abnormality, he should not attempt the kind of big idea Rooseveltian structural changes that progressives advocate. They claim that it was Biden's moderate, incremental campaign for a return to pre-Trumpian normalcy that got him elected. If ignorance is bliss, these champions of the corporate-run status quo must be ecstatic. I was out there in the thick of last year's election, and it definitely was not establishmentarians who saved our nation from Trump too. While party insiders insisted that Biden be the Democratic candidate, they didn't have the voter credibility or outreach to elect him. Big donors and powerful lawmakers don't go door to door, send millions of personal text messages, or volunteer to organize mass rallies. Rather than working with insurgent grassroots activists, the old guard that controls the party apparatus largely got in the way of success, arrogantly refusing to back progressive nominees and deflating the morale of volunteer activists. And while Biden's muted campaign of "I'm not Trump" was calming to moderates, it stamped out any spark of enthusiasm that most voters might have had if he had been a more robust champion of people's needs. The ones who carried Biden into the Oval Office, despite his 50-year career of political meekness, were the grassroots organizers and volunteers from unions, people of color activists, women's networks, youth groups, and so many other rebels against the corporate order that the Democratic powers now demand we preserve. This is Jim Hightower saying Biden's presidential legacy depends on his breaking with Washington insiders and aligning with insurgent progressive activists to make the party an FDR-ish party of the people again.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I know my friends at the American Federation of Government Employees are going to be happy today as they're applauding President Joe Biden's removal of all 10 members of the Federal Service Impasse Panel, who, to be honest, and I've talked about this over the last a year or so, who were probably some of the most anti-union, anti-worker people and imposed some of the worst agreements on federal employees, to the point to where, as some of the folks have told us over the last year or so, that you had a lot of federal employees just leave and have left us with major gaps. So the cleanup after the Trump administration, far and wide in every agency across our government. Now, understand, that's what they wanted. They wanted that destruction. But we've got to clean things up. So it's good to see that they're going. Maybe we can begin cleaning some of that up. But I'll tell you, I'm happy with Joe Biden thus far. I think he's done some very good things on the labor front, and here to share some thoughts on, well, what some of those things are and maybe what needs to be done. I've asked our good friend Paul Secunda to come talk with us, former labor law professor, currently in a private practice, but still a decent guy. Paul, thanks for taking time for us.
Still a decent guy. That's good.
Yeah, I'm generally not a lawyer fan, but you're one of my favorite lawyers, so good guy.
Well, I represent employees, and I'm always on the right side, representing the underdog.
That's what I love about you. So what do you think of this story that Biden, day one, he goes and he cans this Peter Robb, which I think is fantastic. Not just him, but also his second in command, and now this replacing the entire panel of the Federal Service Impasse Panel.
I think it's wonderful. I don't know if you know this, but literally 23 minutes after assuming the presidency, he demanded Peter Robb's resignation. He is a notoriously anti-union general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board. He refused to resign, so Biden fired him. And then Alice Stock, who was another anti-union Trump appointee, then assumed the role of acting general counsel. Biden demanded her resignation. She refused, so he fired him. What I find so amusing and ironic about this is that Stock, the deputy, suggested that her being fired was illegal. Of course, she's wrong. Robb and Stock are at-will employees of the executive. And so, like countless Americans who don't have unions, they have no guarantee against termination without just cause.
Yep.
So Biden didn't violate any laws. He simply gave the nation's chief union buster the boot.
Yeah, and you can't have after 4 years of Donald Trump, claiming everybody was at his whim and he could fire whomever he would like, then go, well, he can't do it now either. Which is why I've kind of taken some joy in listening to right-wing commentators, kind of complaining about it without admitting the fact that their guy did the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's a taste of their own medicine. And what's great is that we're starting to repair some of the most important agencies. We've seen it, as you said, with the Federal Impasse Board. We've seen it with the National Labor Relations Board. We actually have an Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is going to protect workers from COVID. We have a brand new group of Equal Employment Opportunity Commissioners at the EEOC. The list goes on, and it's really wonderful to see. I have to tell you, though, if people don't understand what power the general counsel of the NLRB has, it's important to know that this position is immensely powerful. They have the authority to interpret federal labor law and even to decide which unfair labor practices the agency should prosecute. So when Robb was in charge, he used that power to hobble the union's ability to organize and bargain while destroying the NLRB from the inside. And what I mean by that is he actually basically slashed the NLRB staff, its budget, and so it had a very hard time doing its job. He even attacked the NLRB's own union. So really, this guy was really destructive to labor rights in this country.
Yeah, do you think I'm being hyperbolic when I say this is a defining moment? This is a symbolic moment as much as it is a tactical moment, because Robb was one of the guys, back in 1981 when Reagan fired the Patco workers, who was part of that. That was a moment of symbolism in my view. It was I call it the shot heard across the boardroom, where CEOs are going, "Hey, it's open season on labor." To me, this is that kind of a symbolic shot across the boardroom, going, maybe it's now going back the other way a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. And I think people say, well, Robb had 10 more months to go on his 4-year term. But really, this is a guy who was going day in and day out against the statutory mandate the NLRB, which is to promote labor peace through allowing organizing of unions to take place and to allow collective bargaining of labor contracts to occur. So when Biden fired this guy, and it was really one of the very first things he did, he fulfilled a promise to labor that he wasn't going to allow anyone to flout Congress's intent. And no, it was important that he established that the general counsel be independent. And what's wonderful, and I think you saw this, Rick, is really the guy that he's put in charge now, who was the former regional director in Chicago, or, by the way, the same guy who did that Northwestern opinion saying that college athletes could organize. He has basically now revised or scuttled 10 or so, what are they called, directives or memoranda that Roth had put out. So it's pretty amazing how quickly they've really started to kind of build back up the NLRB as what it should be, which is to protect individuals' rights to organize and to collectively bargain.
Yeah, I want to go through a couple of those things that they had gone through over the years, but one of them, since you brought up the new general counsel or's directives, one of the things that came out today is that they've turned back on this setting rules into what employers and employees and their unions can agree to, these neutrality agreements that they were trying to ban. And for me, and this is where I reach out to my Trump supporting union members going, look, this is really important for all the people who say, I don't want the government between me and my doctor and get the government out of my life. This is Trump's NLRB guy getting government in the middle between what an employer and the employees can agree to. This is putting the government right smack in the middle of that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea here is to get the government out of labor relations. Neutrality agreements essentially allow union organizers access to employer facilities. It allows them to solicit during work hours. It allows the employers to provide unions with workers' contact information. All these things employers would not have to do if they weren't in a neutrality agreement with the union. Essentially, what the neutrality agreement does is it takes the employer out of the equation and really allows employees free choice to decide whether they want to join a union or not. So it's not surprising that the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, which is that conservative advocacy group that has been pushing things like right to work laws and, pushed the whole Janus decision and making fair share fees now possible in the public sector. It's all the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, and they were the ones who were behind basically trying to scuttle all these neutrality agreements, which really gave the unions a fighting shot to organize workplaces.
But you go back to some of the things over the last 4 years that they've gone after. Some of it, the joint employer rule that the Obama administration tried to put in, they immediately overturned that. Some of the employee misclassification stuff. There was a lot of attacks on just what I would argue is sanity. All swung the pendulum further to the side of corporate interests.
Yeah, absolutely, and even like little, what seemed to be minimal things, like making it much more difficult as far as unions having to make financial disclosures, so they have to spend more time on their reporting requirements, have less ability and resources to organize and to engage in collective bargaining. It was really a death by 1,000 cuts. And so what we're doing now is, if you will, we're suturing up those 1,000 cuts, and we're trying to get the patient back up on its feet and starting to take seriously the idea that we need to have all sorts of unions and alt-labor groups to bring worker voice back into the American workplace.
One of the other things that I talk about quite often, in fact, it's something that I'm adding to a presentation I'm doing, we've outlawed yellow dog contracts. I mean, it was ruled unconstitutional years ago, and I know you can cite year, chapter, and verse of when that happened. But as a country, we said making employees sign contracts saying that they'll never join a union is unconstitutional. We'll never do that. But yet now we've got in our system where you can force employees to sign these forced arbitration clauses, where they're basically giving up their constitutional right to go to the courts and seek redress. Now you've got to go to this arbitration system that overwhelmingly benefits the companies, and there doesn't seem to be any real pushback from the people who tell us that they love the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, if you recall, Rick, there was a case called Epic Systems, actually from my home state of Wisconsin. Epic Systems is a company outside of Madison, which basically said not only can you be forced into arbitration and give up your right to a judicial forum, but you can also be forced to waive your right to have your case heard as a class action. So what they were basically doing is they were taking away labor rights by saying you can't work together in concert to bring litigation to improve your workplace. So not only were they trying to push cases out of the court system and into arbitration, but when you get into arbitration, you can't even work with your fellow employees in a class action manner. So this is really bad. And what's great is the House of Representatives under Nancy Pelosi has legislation teed up that will make such mandatory arbitration provisions unlawful and also prevent these so-called class action waivers at the same time, which were permitted by Epic Systems.
Right. But, one of my arguments is that this is another one of those reasons why workers need to have collective bargaining agreements, why they need to be joining and forming unions, because, this is one of those areas where there is some bit of protection. But I've also had people push back, as you just said, first you got to get there. And if all the laws are stacked against you in organizing, as they went back and they made organizing much more difficult, you never get to that place of protection.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the Lochner era when they talked about a constitutional right to contract, but of course all they were talking about was the right of the employer to contract and keep employees in a position of collective begging. We're seeing the same thing with the growth of these mandatory arbitration clauses. Individual employees are being forced, if they want to work, to sign these arbitration provisions. And then when they get into these arbitrations concerning disputes in the workplace, it's not surprising at all that they lose most of these arbitrations with their employers. I think I saw a statistic saying they lose about 80% of these arbitrations, and it's not surprising because the arbitrators who hear these cases, they know where their bread is buttered. We have what's called a repeat player problem, whereas the same people who are hearing these cases over and over again are, siding with the employers because they're the ones who are paying the arbitrators, more times than these individual employees who are just going once for, a particular dispute.
Yeah, it's a rigged system from the beginning because not only is the employer, are these arbitrators heavily deciding towards the companies, the representation isn't there as well because most employees can't go out and spend $200-300 an hour to hire legal counsel to fight their claims and go in through all of this. Again, another one of these reasons why I'm against this system and why I keep coming back to we need to be encouraging collective bargaining, which is something that Biden has said. For the first time in my life, that they're going to pursue. They're going to use the power of the federal government to go back and once again encourage people to join and form unions. There's talk of a cabinet level working group to do just that. Do you have much hope that anything comes out of that?
Well, I think I do. I think it really also depends on whether they're willing to, throw the filibuster in the trash in the Senate. I mean, in the past, when we've had laws like the Employee Free Choice Act back in 2009, when we had laws that would ban striker replacement in 1994, it was always the filibuster in the Senate brought by Republicans which would doom this legislation. If we're really serious about getting rid of the filibuster, one of the big advantages that we would have would be real labor law reform. I mean, bringing in things like card check recognition and interest arbitration and all sorts of reforms that would equalize the playing field and allow employees to say that they want to be in a union and allow the federal government to promote collective bargaining as something that is a good in our economy as far as bringing in worker voice and allowing them to be a part of the companies that they work for. Yeah. So the other thing, Rick, and don't forget this too, we still have to talk about whether we're going to increase the size of the Supreme Court. Remember when they forced Amy Barrett through, that was bringing the conservatives to a 6-3 majority. You might recall that we talked about expanding the court from 9 to 13, so we'd be able to have 7 progressives on top of 6 conservatives. Needless to say, that would go a large way in making it more possible for workers' rights to be vindicated, both within the union, of course, but also just in everyday, employment law that occurs in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, we have really serious problems. And even if we are fortunate enough to pass legislation through, since you brought up the Lochner era, you could have a court system, a Supreme Court, that will continually strike it down as they did back then under the idea of now freedom of contract or whatever catchy phrase they come up with. So I'm with you at some level, but what do you say to the argument then on the Supreme Court that, okay, fine, you pack it to 13, the Republicans take over in a couple years, they move it up to 15, so they get a majority, then it's back, and we have these wild swings in law. Are you concerned about that?
A little bit, but I also think that we really don't have much of a choice right now. I think we've been put into a situation where the Republicans have not played by the rules. I mean, Merrick Garland is being considered for Attorney General as not on the Supreme Court because they held up his nomination for over a year and yet found the way within 3 to 4 weeks to put Amy Coney Barrett on the court. I feel like they've already packed the court, and therefore it is, all's fair in love and war to have the Democrats here do the same thing. Would it expand? I don't know. I mean, it's possible, but I think in the short term, which is I think what we need to think about when we think about labor rights and all the other progressive rights that we care about, this might be a necessary evil.
No, I'm getting to that point where I think we have to do that because sadly, if we do get fortunate enough to pass something through, I do fear the corporate Supreme Court just strikes it down and we end up putting all this effort into getting nothing. And the other part of this that I want to see is I want to see something along the lines, and this is going to take major labor law reform as well. But we're moving towards this independent contractor model. I think something has to be done around that. There are so many people who are considered gig workers now. Is there something down the road in the form of sectorial bargaining? Is there something in a way that we protect workers who aren't the 1930s definition of an employee? And I think that's something that has to be addressed that I don't know a lot of people are talking about yet.
Yeah, I think when you get into the gig workers and these old school distinctions between being an independent contractor and an employee that's protected by all these labor and employment laws, we're losing sight of the point that mostly today, whether you are a gig worker or a leased worker or per diem worker or any kind of precarious worker, you are dependent on your employer. And as someone who is dependent, whether they are considered a traditional employer or not, they should get the same protections that any other worker should get. Yeah. So that means everything from occupational safety and health to the ability to have benefits like retirement and health care, but also protections against discrimination, retaliation, protection against wage theft, and the list goes on and on. So I believe that those kind of dichotomies between independent contractors on the one hand and employees on the other are really no longer serving their purpose. And I think we should just have one category, workers, and workers have rights in the workplace. End of story.
I'm right there with you. And on that vein, the last place I want to end up is, I don't know if you've been following the organizing campaign that's going on down in Alabama with the Amazon workers. But there was another story today of the treatment of, you can't even go to the bathroom without being inundated with anti-worker messaging from Amazon. And, you look at this kind of harassment, this kind of, just this overwhelming attack that unions don't have the ability to defend against. Is there a way forward to protect workers from this kind of treatment?
Well, I think having the NLRB enforce surveillance prohibitions will be helpful. I think it's also important that we get more protections for workers as far as not being overwhelmed by what I would call captive audience meetings or captive audience messaging. I saw on CNBC that Amazon had actually posted a job listing for 2 intelligence analysts who could monitor labor organizing threats and other sensitive topics and report their findings to internal stakeholders up to and including executive leadership. Yeah. When they were called on this, not surprisingly, Amazon later deleted the job listings and said that the job descriptions were inaccurate. But, I'm not so sure. I just think that when we see this type of anti-union corporate behavior, we have to push back at all levels. We have to push back through the grassroots, through effective union organizing and the use of solidarity to push back against blatant use of corporate power. But we also have to use the legal arsenal that we have, whether it be through the National Labor Relations Board, whether it be through the courts, although, as you pointed out, those have become more hostile with all the Trump appointees, but also just working for new legislation that would make it much more difficult for these large employers to act in such an anti-union way and making life so difficult for those who just want a voice in the workplace.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I got to be honest, I'm reading these stories, and maybe it's just that I've been fortunate my entire working life to have always had a good paying union job that has given me the ability to have voice and to feel that sense of empowerment. But I look at the treatment that these people have to endure. And for me, even if I knew nothing about the union, for me, I think it would push me towards going, if they're telling me that this is so bad for me and they're spending all of this resource, it must be good for me. I better get it. 'Cause, my grandfather always used to say, if a rich guy's going to spend $1 to tell you don't need something, you better spend $2 to get it. And this to me is one of those scenarios.
Well, absolutely. And just remember, and maybe your listeners know this as well, it's not just Amazon. It's a lot of kind of big business. I read another story about Walmart recently where they were accused of monitoring their employee discussions on Reddit. Google had created a tool to flag possible organizing activity. So this gets really scary, very Big Brother-ish, using technology in a way that suppresses employee voice. Not the way that we want technology to be used going forward in this country.
No, I'm with you. The fact since you bring up technology, Amazon. Another story today broke out of Amazon where they're in New Jersey giving people these wristwatches that monitor their every moment, everything they do, from scratching their head to wiping their behind. Somebody's taking notes on it.
Well, there is a company here in Wisconsin that actually said, "Hey, we'll put a chip in your wrist, in your body, and you can use the copy machines and the vending machines to get into the garage, open up the garage for the parking." But, people don't really think that if there's a chip in you for those purposes, what else are they using that chip for? Yeah. To kind of control your life both inside and outside the workplace. I think the encroachment on employees increasingly, especially since so many employees are working outside of a traditional workplace in these COVID times, is really something that people have to pay attention to and make sure they're not losing that autonomy and that privacy that's so important to basic ideas of happiness that we have in this country.
I'm right there with you. And for me, again, it comes back to that union contract that protects my privacy and those things as well. Just crazy stuff. But Paul, I appreciate the time and the thoughts. Always great talk with you. Always learn something. I appreciate it.
Okay, Rick. Have a great night.
Our good friend, attorney Paul Secunda. Again, one of my favorite people, does a fantastic job. And like I said, always learn something from him. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Where GM forges a path, Chevrolet, GMC, Cadillac, and Buick will follow with electric vehicles that help put everyone in an EV.
General Motors to phase out internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035. Global temperatures warm to highest levels since dawn of human civilization. Plus, good news. Court rolls back another Trump rollback.
All of those rolling rollbacks and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
California finally lifted some restrictions. We are now allowed to get the mail and flee wildfires.
Things are looking up. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, very, very good news. Very, very huge news concerning electric cars.
Yep.
But first, a huge monster storm in the Northeast.
Oh, yes. As we go to air, that huge storm is pushing snowfall records in the Northeast. We won't know for a while the exact influence of man-made climate change on this specific storm, but
it made it worse.
But the bracing intensity is in line with scientists' analysis that global warming turbocharges extreme weather events.
That's what I said.
A warmer atmosphere holds more water vapor, which translates into more intense precipitation. And when it's cold, that means big snow. A similarly intense storm hit Central California in recent days, washing out part of the iconic Pacific Coast Highway. Unfortunately, the rain is not enough in California to end California's ongoing drought.
Again with the drought?
Oh, yes. On to our top story. General Motors stock rose after the company announced late last week that it will end production of conventional gasoline and diesel engines, the largest U.S. automaker to do so.
Wait, you mean they announced they're going to all electric cars and their stock actually went up?
Yes, it did.
It didn't tank the entire company?
Shocker.
I'm going to complain to Fox News. They've been misleading me.
GM announced the company will eliminate tailpipe emissions from all of its new cars and light trucks by 2035, including its SUVs. And GM announced that it is aiming for carbon neutrality, powering all of its global operations with 100% renewable energy no later than 2040. In a videotaped statement, CEO Mary Barra acknowledged that today clean cars make up only a small fraction of the global auto fleet. However,
we believe that is all about to change. At GM, we believe that after one of the most difficult years in recent history, this moment will prove to be an inflection point. The moment when our world's reliance on gas and diesel-powered vehicles will begin transitioning to an all-electric future.
GM's shift to all-electric vehicles is a huge signal to the U.S. auto industry. European automakers like Volkswagen and BMW were already moving in a similar direction. China, the world's biggest car market, already ordered that nearly all new cars must be all-electric by 2036. Transportation accounts for about one-third of U.S. annual emissions and is a primary source of toxic air pollution. So transitioning to all-electric cars will have tremendous impacts on reducing emissions and saving billions of dollars in avoided public health costs.
It's 1/3 of our total emissions, but it is the largest single source of emissions, correct?
Yep.
So this will make a huge difference.
Oh, yes. And important to note that a recent MIT study confirmed previous research showing that in all cases, regardless of whether an electric vehicle is charged by renewable energy or fossil fuels, EVs are cleaner and greener than gas and diesel cars.
Thank you for clearing that up.
And the climate impact matters because a new study on Monday concluded that global temperatures are now at their highest levels since the dawn of human civilization. The new analysis of ocean surface temperatures shows the planet is warmer now than it has been for at least 12,000 years, a period spanning the entire development of human civilization.
Oh, we are totally nailing it.
And they found levels of carbon dioxide are rising at the fastest rate in 66 million years. Good news for Puerto Rico. The Biden administration announced Monday it will release $1.3 billion in aid that had been appropriated to help the island rebuild after Hurricane Maria's devastation more than 3 years ago. But the Trump administration had withheld it. The Biden administration is also in the process of removing new restrictions on an additional $5 billion in aid for Puerto Rico, restrictions that former President Trump put in place just hours before leaving office.
So he's been blocking billions of dollars from going to Puerto Rico for any particular reason?
You got me.
Other than he's a jerk?
Finally, some very good news. A federal court has vacated the Trump administration's last-minute secret science rule that sought to prohibit certain types of public health research and would have severely curtailed the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to write new pollution rules. The judge threw out the rule, saying it was shoddily constructed and improperly issued.
We cannot roll back that guy fast enough. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters, please, at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I'm seeing some chatter around the possibility that the Supreme Court tomorrow, as early as tomorrow, could come out with a decision in the California versus Texas case that would basically just chuck out the ACA. Now, there's a bunch of possibilities. I'm not a legal expert. But there are some bad outcomes. They could chuck the whole case, throw the entire ACA law out by overturning the law and ruling it unconstitutional. That's the worst case scenario. They could throw the case out and the law would stay where it's at. Say it's we've decided on this, we've ruled, it's over. I guess they could strike down the individual mandate, which has a zero penalty, which would be fine. I don't care. It's not there anyway. But there's a bunch of stuff where you could get into just monkeying around with how the ACA works. That would just make it horrible, and coming up with bizarre who knows what. So I'm hoping they don't decide it. I'm hoping there's a way to pull back from it, but. During a pandemic, I think is the worst time to be taking health care from people. Just kind of throwing that out there. And here to share some thoughts on, who knows what this looks like and where we are with the virus, I've asked our resident expert, Dr. Kelly Sennholz, to come talk with us. Dr. Sennholz, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, getting rid of the ACA during a pandemic is a bad idea.
Brilliant. It's a brilliant idea. We could thin the herd even more. I mean, this seems to be in my view, the only answer to overpopulation is just kill them off by not giving them insurance.
Well, I have a feeling they're not going to do much, and this is why we've got the Senate, the House, and the presidency. And if they did away with the whole bill, basically we could just invent a new one at that point. It really just pokes the dog, to speak of it.
Yeah, I love your optimism. I really do, but I don't agree. Because if we didn't have Joe Manchin, if you didn't have Kelly Semina, if you didn't have John Tester, if you didn't have Mark Kelly, should I go on? Because there are more. If you didn't have these centrist Democrats who, I worry are not going to come along. Then maybe I'd go, I'm with you. We could get that stuff through. Have one giant budget reconciliation bill that puts everything we want into it. That's never going to happen.
This is what I'm thinking.
No, it's what we need. We need to have a major correction, but it's not going to happen when you've got people like Manchin and Semina and the others.
boy, didn't Manchin get poked in the loins this week.
Yeah, the right wing going all crazy because evidently they're very sensitive for Senator Joe because Kamala Harris went to West Virginia, did some media, and kind of poked him, and all they could come up with is she said landmine instead of mine lands, which just got them all worked up.
They can't spell, though. Even in their response to the impeachment documents, they can't spell. It's really sad.
Yeah, well, when you're used to dictating by tweet, there's a lot of forgiveness on Twitter. Because look, even me with the big giant thumbs, I have typos all the time too. So I don't beat people up on Twitter as much as some do. But autofill and my giant thumbs, sometimes I give a lot of leeway. But if you're putting something into a legal document, you probably should have read that.
This is what I'm saying.
Just a thought. Some good news though today. I mean, we're sitting on some good news. The U.S. has fallen below 100,000 new infections per day for the first time in, I guess, 2 months now.
Yeah.
It looks like potentially, we're over the worst of it and we're on the downside. Or am I being too optimistic?
Well, I am actually euphoric. Yes, we're on the downside, but here's the problem. We're still something like, 10 times higher than the emergency bad rate of infection. So we shouldn't get too excited. Right now, what we are is we're in a race. And we're in a race to vaccinate people before the mutations take over. Remember last February or March, I said the purposeful increase in virus that Trump was causing, the worst problem with it was going to be the mutations.
Right.
That the more virus you have, the more mutations you have.
Correct.
And here we are a year later, and I hear people saying the same things we were saying a year ago, which is when you let a virus go wild, you just statistically increase the odds of mutations.
Right.
And you really don't have control over what's happening. So we're in a race right now. And if you look at it this way, we need to vaccinate enough people to bring the R0 below 1. When each person that gets infected infects less than 1 on average, say 0.87 or whatever, then the virus will die out. So the goal is to get to that point before the mutations roar the infections back up again. That's what's happening right now.
Right, and we're seeing. I mean, the UK just reported that they're concerned about these mutations because their numbers are really high. And I talked about this yesterday. I mean, this stuff happens when you do have more people who have it, and there's stupid people like I used to be who don't finish their drugs. I talked about my doctor who yelled at me for like 10 minutes because I didn't finish my antibiotic, and that's where I got a crash course lesson on on things that become drug resistant and then mutate into something worse. This is a lesson I think we all need to have as Americans, and we need a doctor to yell at us to tell us, hey, this is how it is.
I've been talking to people around the world, and yes, in Europe, they're really having a bad time of it right now. Those mutations have taken over and roared their infections back up. That's really, we do not want that. But here's another little thing. A scientist and I were talking about this, and I thought, I don't think people understand this. When we're getting our vaccination, let's say the RNA vaccination, they're vaccinating our body to recognize that little crown on top of the virus. And so when we get in contact with the virus, it recognizes the crown and goes to work getting rid of it. But here's the thing. You still have virus in your body. So what happens, let's say you're vaccinated fully and you have a good response and you come in contact with COVID. You can still get COVID. And not very few people will, but you still can't. But even the people who don't get COVID will have a reaction to other parts of the virus. Then the capsule around the virus, the internal things in the virus. So when you come in contact with a real live virus, it will actually boost your immune system. The big thing that I think we need to talk about is the fact that research came out saying that the virus can hide in your brain and can reactivate. In other words, just like a cold sore where you get it one time and then you can get it over and over.
Right.
That's what's happening.
So you get a cold sore on your brain?
Yes, it's a cold sore of the brain, but it's worse than a cold sore of the brain because it affects all the body functions. Your brain is computer central, and your kidneys, your gut, everything in your body is connected to your brain. So common symptoms are headaches, and everybody talks about the smell thing, but there's also some increasingly common symptoms of depression, anxiety, even dementia and delirium are more common. So we're talking about some pretty serious brain issues. People have symptoms that are like a serious case of MS, for instance, where it affects all the nerves of their body. So what I'm trying to get at is that when you get in your vaccination, and say you come in contact with the virus, your body's going to be able to recognize it faster. It will get rid of it faster and hopefully prevent it from getting into your brain.
Right.
That's a really big reason to tell everybody to get vaccinated.
Right. It's one of these things where, what I'm not hearing you say is get the vaccine and it's time to go wild.
No. And in fact, I already hear people trying to push on that. Like, well, if I have my vaccine, do I really need to wear a mask anymore? Yes, you should wear a mask. You don't want to have a chronic virus in your brain if you can help it.
Yeah.
We know that the COVID virus can cross the blood-brain barrier, which is, it's a weird thing. It's not good. The receptors that cause the virus to get in your body are located in your frontal lobe. So things like personality changes, things like that could be a symptom. We just don't know all of it yet. And if you can keep it out of your body, that's a good thing.
No, that's the best thing. And look, I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one on radio or TV, which is why I defer to smart people like you. And I defer to my family doctor who told me at the beginning of this, he goes, the day they tell us that we can go without a mask, he goes, do you know who's going to still be wearing a mask? He goes, me. He goes, right because on. The day they say it's okay, there's still a period of time after that where you've got to protect yourself. This is about being smart and protecting yourself as much as others. Look, and this is one of my problems is because you've got so many people who clearly don't care about themselves and certainly don't care about me, which is why the rest of us are struggling with this as much as we are.
They really did it to us. If everybody had followed the scientific guidelines from the beginning, we wouldn't be in the position we're in right now. We just wouldn't. And, unfortunately, there was a lot of confusion early on with masks, but that came from Trump. He was messing with the CDC. He was, this has been his big thing masks and Trump are so intricately aligned now that there are some people that will never. However, scientists are saying, they've said for years, if people would mask up during flu season, it would be better than the vaccinations we have. And sure enough, we have the graphs back now this week that not only the flu, but RSV, which is a very predominant virus in the winter, both of them have been near zero all year. So I think there's going to be a lot of certainly doctors that will wear masks at work at the very least during the winter season.
Yeah, and look, I guess we're kind of used to it now. But this is one of those moments where, and I was just having this conversation with a friend who's a labor leader, and they're grappling with how they're going to deal with, when employers start mandating that their employees have to get these shots because they're grappling with how they're going to deal with this. Because you don't want an employer demanding and imposing things on your workers, but also you want people to be sane. And I was saying the reality is get the damn shot. It's not that difficult. And this is what we need. We need people like you to just come out and say, get the damn shot. What's wrong with you?
Yes.
Are you stupid?
Yes, they need to. And it's horrifying to hear people that work in, for instance, nursing homes saying they don't want to get the shot. I'm like, you work with vulnerable people that could die if you give them this virus. What are you thinking? I don't know what they're thinking.
Yeah, they're not thinking. And here again, these are
laser. There's an Israeli laser.
Yeah, it's the Jewish laser. But this is one of those weird moments where you go, there's been a lot of media attention around these nurses. Which I got to be honest, and maybe this, and you can yell at me if you think I'm wrong, but these aren't actual nurses. These are people who do the lower level nursing work, but they're not really nurses. These are people who have a little bit of information, who are trained to do certain tasks to care for our elderly and folks. But they're not really the top of the food chain, and we've spent a lot of time saying that they're turning against this, which I have a real problem with, because every person that I see as a nurse, which I consider an RN a nurse, they're saying get the damn shot.
They are, but I have to say, unfortunately, not just nurses but doctors too. We have the psychological manipulation of white male supremacy that's going on. It crosses all boundaries, and I've known real nurses and I've known real doctors that have said some of the most outrageous things you've ever heard in your life.
Yeah, I guess stupid doesn't know educational bounds, does it?
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, but I have to say, I'm going to say about 95% of doctors are normal and 95% of nurses. But there are exceptions. But yeah, those are nursing assistants.
Yeah, I'm at the point where now, and look, I'm glad I'm not in the position of my friend. I'm of the mindset either you get the damn shot, you figure out how to protect yourself, or you got to go. Because I have no more patience for stupid.
The beautiful thing, though, is there's been, in the last month, between the election, the inauguration, the attack on our country, the crazy stuff coming out of the mouths of some of the Republican Congress people, I think there's been a dramatic shift. A lot of people that were willing to put up with some of that are now going, well, I didn't mean that crazy.
Yeah, we wanted crazy, but we wanted crazy light.
Right. And also, oh my God, Biden is doing such a great job. And his team of people he has chosen are excellent. His press spokesperson is just fabulous. The people he's chosen on the virus teams, hopefully the AG that's coming up. I mean, his team is strong. They're committed. They're angry, and they're willing to. You know what the biggest thing is too? The people are behind them. They don't have to be afraid that they're stepping out onto the skinny branches and somebody's going to cut them off.
Yeah.
We're with them, and so they have the power to make all the changes we've been wanting for years.
Yeah. The hope is that this is that moment where we go, you know what, this is what functional government looks like. This is how functional government works. And we move forward in a much, much more positive way. Because I'll tell you, since the 20th, and granted, it's only been, a couple of days, my stress level has gone way down.
Oh, isn't life good again?
Life is, the sun comes up.
Oh, it's so the sunrises are more beautiful. The air is clear. Everybody is happier. Yeah, It's good.
And fortunately, I can still taste because I don't have COVID, and hopefully the Biden folks will get this under control. Continue to do the things that should have been done months ago. We get past this, we move on, we rebuild, we do all of the stuff that needs to be done, and I don't have to worry about my children's future. Just my thoughts. So, last question I've got for you. There's talk about all these different drugs. Evidently, the Russian vaccine that's been done. This Sputnik 5. 92% accurate. You see the Johnson & Johnson ones like 72% accurate. How do we know which is which, and which ones do you suggest?
I think that the big thing is you're not really going to have a choice. You're going to get the one you get. I think some of the lower, the vaccines that don't work quite as well, they're going to give to younger people. And so those will be withheld till later. Right now, we're vaccinating people that are 70 and over. It varies a little bit from area to area, but we're vaccinating the more vulnerable people, so they're getting the vaccines that work really well. But as we start to decrease the number of live infections in the community, those lower numbered vaccines are going to be fine. People don't realize, like, a lot of years, the flu vaccine only has like a 40% efficacy. But when a lot of people get it, it keeps the flu under control.
Right.
If we have a lot of people that have gotten the 95% vaccine, especially the ones that are more vulnerable, we're going to get rid of the virus, or at least be able to control it.
Let's hope. Let's hope. And as this continues, love to have you back to share some more of your expertise and tell people, get the damn shot.
Get the damn shot.
There
Thanks
you
so
go.
much. You have a wonderful evening.
You too. Thanks so much. Our good friend, Dr. Kelly Sennholz. Quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1821. That was the birthday of the first woman to earn her medical degree in the United States. Her name was Elizabeth Blackwell. She was born in Bristol, England. Her family moved to the United States when she was just 11 years old. Elizabeth decided she wanted to pursue a career in medicine. She believed that women patients should have the option of a female doctor. But it was not easy to make her dream come true. Medicine was considered men's work. Undeterred, Elizabeth began to study medicine on her own. Medical schools rejected her applications. Finally, she was accepted to the Geneva Medical College in New York. Most students at the school were horrified by the idea of a woman studying medicine, but she won many over with her ability and hard work. In 1849, she completed her work and graduated. But her difficulties were not over. No hospital in New York would hire her. She was even refused rental space when landlords found out she wanted it for a woman-run medical practice. Finally, she purchased a home for her practice. She also started a medical dispensary for the poor in New York City. She was later joined in her work by her sister, who also graduated with a medical degree. She went on to lecture on medicine in England, becoming the first woman to have her name on the British Medical Register. She and her sister helped to train nurses for service during the Civil War. They also founded a women's medical college that operated for 31 years. By her determination, Elizabeth Blackwell helped open the door for future generations of women to work in the field of medicine. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you remember yesterday I talked about there were a number of the Capitol rioters, the seditionist Capitol rioters who were there to stop the steal, the voter fraud, to stop those illegals from voting, to count the vote. That they didn't even bother themselves to vote, which is just beyond, again, I said yesterday, the steal of George Bush frame, uniquely American. To complain about something that you yourself didn't do or weren't involved in or somehow made worse, uniquely American. And on that same vein, I look at this attorney, this Lynn Wood, who now, Lynn has gotten himself a little bit in trouble, perhaps, in the state of Georgia. Evidently, the Secretary of State's office in Georgia has launched an investigation into the attorney, Lynn Wood, because they're saying he wasn't eligible to vote in Georgia. Evidently, he had sent them an email saying that he had been domiciled in South Carolina for several months after purchasing a home in April. April is well before November, so had he been, a resident of South Carolina, not in Georgia, because, again, I don't know the laws of Georgia, but, I got to assume that you've got to be in the state, a resident of the state, to vote. Now, they're looking into it saying, look, if he bought a property, if you set down roots, if that's where he was living and they can prove that's where he's living, possibly voter fraud. And wouldn't that just be such poetic justice that one of Trump's attorneys, one of his big mouthpieces, guilty of voter fraud? Quite remarkable. But a big week ahead as we steam towards the impeachment. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. If you've got thoughts, questions, comments, love to hear them. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, the podcast you can get at the website. Get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. Like I said, lots of fun coming up. Make sure you tune in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.